Hello everybody, Leah Harlann here. Today's video is going to be a little different content-wise from what I've been mostly making on this channel so far. But I do play this game, and the issue is actually pretty relevant to some of the classes I'm currently taking in my studies to become a librarian, so I thought it would be interesting to make a video to discuss this and kind of give my own opinions about it. So, in case you didn't know, the developers of a rhythm gacha game called Hatsune Miku Colorful Stage, also known by its other name, Project Sekai, recently posted a statement saying they were canceling the Revival My Dream event. Now, for those of you who had not known what this event is, Revival My Dream is an event that originally ran on the JP server from around late October of 2021. And the global server is just about exactly 1 year behind the JP server, so we were scheduled to have this event in late October as well. But we received this statement from the developers about a week ago on September 22nd, I believe. So I will read the statement out in full in case you do not know what it says. We have an important, I should start at the beginning of the message. Thank you for playing Hatsune Miku Colorful Stage. We have an important message regarding an in-game event, Revival My Dream, that was held in October 2021 on the Japanese version of the game. Upon reviewing the story and event-related gacha Alchemist's Revival Gacha, we have concluded that some of the contents include expressions deemed inappropriate in general for the game. We are unable to alter the contents of the story or the gacha to suit the standards that would be acceptable for everyone, even after multiple consultations with the relevant parties, and it will be cancelled. Unfortunately, some of the stories of the growth of colorful stage characters from this event would not be available. Please note that we may make similar decisions in the future and remove the in-game contents if they are inappropriate for release and we are unable to alter it to be suitable for release. As the compensation for the event's cancellation, we will be preparing in-game gifts and additional content soon. We should be able to follow up with information regarding these contents before the end of September. We thank you for your patience, support, and understanding. Now, today is September 29th as I am recording this video, and so far I have not seen any further announcement from the Project Sekai social media. Hi everyone, Editor Leah here. The very next day, on September 30th, the devs released an in-game announcement stating what we would be receiving as compensation for the event cancellation, as well as when these gifts would be distributed. Compensation includes a free 10-roll gacha banner starting on October 25th, all of the crystals that we would have obtained from playing the event, attending the after show, and reading the stories will be obtainable now through a series of very easy missions, and we will get the story's song, Showtime Ruler, as a free gift on October 26th. So yeah, ultimately no loss of rewards, just the cards and the story. But yeah, at this time, I haven't seen anything. Today they actually just posted the schedule for next month's events, in which notably Revival My Dream is absent, and that kind of, caused a resurgence of comments about this, so that is why I decided it was still worth making this video. The premise of the event that they are referring to when they say, colorful stage characters won't receive growth, is that a character in the group Wonderland Showtime, Kamishiro Rui, experiences some pretty significant character growth during this event story. So a lot of people did express disappointment that we will not see this character growth because the whole event is being removed from the EN server. This also means, of course, that the gacha banner that players can roll for specific cards will also be removed, and that means 4-star cards featuring Rui, Nene, and Emu are all going to be removed, and I would assume this also means that the event cards you get from the shop, meaning the 2-star Kagamine Rin and the 3-star Tsukasa card, will also be removed and unable to be obtained. But what does this statement really say about the event? What does expressions deemed inappropriate in general even mean? So let's take a look and dive into the content of the Revival My Dream story and banner. The general premise of the event is that the Wonderland Showtime crew are to perform a show at a special location that has a mansion, gardens, and a large tree. Rui wants to bring back the show that he had thought of as a child, but none of his classmates would perform with him because it was too dangerous. It is this play that Rui wrote that is the crux of the controversy. The story goes that a town located near a forest that has people in it are at odds with each other. Both groups believe the opposing side to be nefarious and dangerous in some way, but an officer from the town meets a nice forest dweller and starts working to improve relations between their peoples. However, a minister who is there to exploit valuable resources from the forest had been undermining perceptions of the forest dwellers for some time in order to have reasonable cause to take that land, and he plotted to renew the conflict. Ultimately, his plan fails, and a peace treaty is signed, and they live happily ever after. The character growth that Rui has in this event is not related at all. None of the characters personally hold the views demonstrated in the play's conflict. The play's theme is one of overcoming prejudices and assumptions to see that people who are different from you are not bad. So why are people claiming that it's racist? A play about learning to not be racist can't do that, right? Well, that's where the debate arises. There are multiple parts of this event that are deemed problematic by parts of the Project Sekai community. I want to start with the story as it is the primary material. So let me ask you if this sounds familiar. A group of foreigners settle down in an area only to find out that other people are already living nearby. The guy in charge, who is very, very evil, wants to get rid of the people who were there first because they're sitting on top of a very valuable resource that he wants to take back to his home country. So he riles up his people into thinking those locals are bad news and waits for the right moment. But some goody two-shoes meets one of the forest people and finds out, hey, they're not so bad, and tries to convince everyone else to give them a chance. This actually does kind of impact things. But the big bad man forces tensions to escalate, and things are looking pretty dire for everyone until the nice forest person risks her life to save the goody two-shoes character. And then everyone is just like, wow, maybe we really did just misunderstand each other the whole time. And they all live in peace and harmony with nature after that. Do you see what I'm getting at? Does the story sound a little familiar to you? We all remember that Disney's Pocahontas was a bad movie, right? That it was a cartoonishly bad portrayal of Native Americans, and it was a white person's story to make them feel better about how they treated indigenous people because we have so much in common. And bad, greedy white people are the reason things went so badly between us. This was obvious when the movie came out in 1995. But the Project Sekai writers told basically the same story in 2021. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the screenshots directly taken from the event when it was ran in the Japanese server. These are translated by a YouTuber named Arvin Oven. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but I have the full playlist of their translation of the entire event linked down below, so feel free to check it out for yourself. But I wanted to highlight a few notable examples of dialogue that is written for the script of this play. Now, Tsukasa, who plays an officer from the town, actually calls the forest dwellers barbaric. This is a term many of us find familiar when used in the context of denigrating and insulting indigenous people. These are also lines in the script. Some of these other characters are sort of helping them practice. So these characters are helping recite the lines for the play. This is not the live performance of the play, nor is it characters actually using this dialogue as if it is their own opinion. They call the forest dwellers uncivilized people, wearing what they have. This is obviously a remark upon their clothing. And it says, and they refer to them their presence as scary. Now, we flip over to the script about the forest people who are afraid of the townspeople and the behavior that the townspeople have been showing. Emu is playing the main character of the forest dwellers, and then Nene is playing her friend. So Nene says, if they catch you, they will sell you to a different country. Does that sound kind of like slavery? Like a real historical thing that happened to Native Americans and other indigenous people? Gee, I wonder why Nene's character would feel the need to mention that as like a thing that she's afraid will happen to her. Later, when the conflict is rising and tensions are escalating between the two peoples, it specifically says that the line before that is that the townspeople are believed to have misplaced an item of value or stole an item of value. That is the big misunderstanding that happens in the story. And so Nene says the forest dwellers are angry and are going to burn the town down. And this is supposed to be, I believe, a preemptive strike when they hear that the towns dwellers are angry. Street noise. When the townspeople are angry and are going to come attack the forest dwellers, believing that they stole the townspeople's valuable item. So this is sort of a line about inciting violence. Now, Rui plays the main villain in this story. Rui is a character much like the certain evil character we saw in the Pocahontas movie, who is specifically inciting negative feelings between the two groups in order to take advantage of the conflict to get what he wants, which is a valuable resource that is on the land that the forest dwellers are residing in. He specifically credits Tsukasa's character, the officer, with working to improve the relationships between the forest and town dwellers. This is something that is credited specifically to Tsukasa, the presumably, white civilized character, as opposed to any of the forest dwellers. Now, let me go over some of the content in the story in more detail, because a lot of people are saying, well, this story is inspired by Princess Mononoke, not Pocahontas. Princess Mononoke was the Japanese movie that has, a sort of indigenous character and is all about, these two groups of people in conflict over nature. I'm going to hide this for now. Not what I meant to do. People say it's inspired by Princess Mononoke. So it can't be racist, and it doesn't have anything to do with Native Americans or other indigenous cultures, and it definitely isn't supposed to, be a parallel to Pocahontas. It's supposed to be inspired by Princess Mononoke. Well, first and most importantly, that isn't confirmed anywhere. The devs have never stated outright that they used Princess Mononoke as an inspiration for this event story, so that is complete speculation. Secondly, you should notice by now that the script Rui wrote has way more in common with Pocahontas than with Princess Mononoke, which, by the way, covered a lot of themes that were fairly different from what this story and Pocahontas cover. The themes in Princess Mononoke are primarily about environmentalism and the battle between human progress and nature's desire to preserve itself, the social stigma around disabled people and sex workers in the town that Lady Eboshi is building, and then also the balance of good and evil and violence and peace being something that exists in all of us. It is a very morally gray story, in fact, and not a straightforward good versus evil storyline. Both San and the townspeople are morally gray. They both have causes that they are fighting for and reasons and motivations for what they do that could be construed as good. And both of them take actions that would be looked down on or disapproved of. Both of them become violent. And so it really isn't the same as the story that Wonderland Showtime puts on. Regardless of the intent or the references that the writers may have intended to make to Princess Mononoke, the end result is not very similar or reflective of the story told in Princess Mononoke. So now that you can see the similarities, do you also understand why people might call the script racist? The terms used by the townspeople, even the officer, played by Tsukasa, calling the forest dwellers barbaric, savage, uncivilized. This is the same language that has been used in regards to indigenous people for ages, and not just any particular indigenous culture. It's a very common thread running through stories of colonization, that the intruding or invading nation or culture sees the indigenous culture that is already there as primitive, backwards, and needing enlightenment from these newcomers who are just so much better and more advanced than they are. So whether the writers intended it or not, using this beloved Ghibli movie as inspiration doesn't excuse what the end result ended up being. This event is not something I would proudly claim as being inspired by Princess Mononoke, because it ended up so different and oversimplified. We should also bear in mind and take a look at the cards from the gacha as well, because the initial sort of knee-jerk reaction and opinions people formed when hearing this news was that it must have to do with the cards, because, the characters wear costumes for the play. And a lot of people were claiming cultural appropriation and racism from how the characters are dressed. So let me go ahead and pull those up for you. We'll start with what I think are the easier cards to look at. The lower rarity cards that you get from the shop, namely the 2-star Rin and the 3-star Tsukasa, are primarily steampunk in aesthetic, which is ultimately harmless. I would like to show you, however, Tsukasa's card in the pre-upgraded state. So if you look here, it shows both Tsukasa and Rui's costumes that they are wearing in the play, and both are notably Western in style. So what I would like to ask the people who claim that this is supposed to be Mononoke inspired, why would they choose this aesthetic for the townspeople when in Princess Mononoke, the village people are Japanese and wear Japanese clothing that is traditional for that time period? Why is Tsukasa a military officer, which is much more similar to John Smith from Pocahontas, when Lady Eboshi, who is the leader of the town and many people claim is his parallel?
Hello again. I misspoke here. I meant to say his parallel is Ashitaka, the main character of Mononoke with the cursed arm, who serves a more neutral role than John Smith does. Ashitaka is from an indigenous culture called the Emishi, a real ethnic group that inhabited mainland Japan. He is not affiliated with either side of the main conflict, having arrived in search of a cure for his curse, but eventually helps and hinders both sides during the course of the movie.
But the rest of the gacha cards are probably the strongest evidence of why people claim that this is inspired by Princess Mononoke, and I do see it. If we take a look at Emu's pre-upgraded card, again featuring her costume for the show, it's very generic. You can't really tie this to any particular indigenous culture. It's just really hard to claim it's cultural appropriation when there's no notable elements of it that call to a particular culture or ethnicity. There are, however, a few similarities that are notable elements of San's design in Princess Mononoke, like the triangles on the face paint, the furs, and the sort of fur cape she's wearing with the fangs and the beads being particularly similar. So if we look at the upgraded cards, though, you can see that both of these cards feature large animals. Now, I didn't bother showing Nene's pre-upgraded card because it has nothing to do with the play itself. It doesn't show her in a play costume. But if you look at both of these cards, they feature large animals, very fantasy in nature. This one seems to be a wolf, but also has large curving horns. And then in Nene's card, they are large saber-toothed cats or tigers of some kind. And a child would be able to look at these and probably say, oh yeah, that's like the lady in Princess Mononoke having like the large wolf companions. Their costumes are also a lot more fantasy-esque in these designs, and Emu is the more obvious example. So you see there's a lot more accessories like jewelry and things like that, even on Nene. And Emu's design in particular is much more colorful. You see that the animal companions also have some decorations on them. This leans a lot more towards fantasy and fantasy, like made-up cultures. A lot of the designs we see here, of course, triangles are still a prominent pattern, but no, I haven't found anyone pointing out elements of either of these costumes that are particularly unique or reminiscent of a specific indigenous culture either. And they don't strike me as being very stereotypically Native American or indigenous looking either. If you look at the outfits we see in like Pocahontas and other Hollywood movies from the 90s, these outfits do not look like those. So I will definitely admit that I see why people claim that the event is a lot more Mononoke inspired when you look at the cards. I will say also Rui's design is quite negligible as well, because it is obviously very steampunk in nature. He's the villain character from the town. The town definitely leans more into a steampunk theme than any particular real world culture, and his pre-upgraded card also was not relevant to the play at all. So if we look at everything contained in this event, I think we can all see that there is at least a case for the concerns over racism. In my studies as a librarian, one of the core tenets of our profession is to make the library a welcoming and safe environment for everyone. Part of upholding this value means learning cultural competency and sensitivity so that we can come to understand the perspectives and struggles faced by the people of different identities who use the library. But we also believe in intellectual freedom, which is the right to access information without restriction. We do not believe in censorship. We resist book bans and strive to keep a balanced collection of materials to represent all sides of an issue so that any patron of the library can come in and find any information for themselves and not just a single perspective. This is also to avoid the mistakes of the past when our historical archives prioritized only the perspective of the dominant colonizing culture in our records instead of anybody else's. There is a wonderful TED Talk called The Dangers of a Single Story, and I highly suggest all of you go look at it if you have not seen it before. It's very brilliantly done. However, I believe that this policy doesn't necessarily extend to popular media. Popular media is held to a different standard due to the level of influence it has on the audience and the power it has over our perception of the world around us. We have seen a notable shift in recent years towards seeking better and more accurate representation of minorities in our media to prevent the reduction of those identities to harmful stereotypes and prejudices. I could do a whole separate video on that topic though, so I'm not going to dive into it any further for the time being. So, is Revival My Dream an evil, racist event that has cultural appropriation and needed to be canceled? I think everyone on social media kind of blew their interpretations of this incident out of proportion. And I do mean everyone. This event certainly leans towards harmful and insensitive portrayals of indigenous peoples. It uses the same stereotypes and tropes that we saw in movies for many, many years. But it also doesn't do anything out of ill intent, nor does it commit terrible sins like using outright slurs or painting the forest dwellers as the villains. Now, that being said, I do agree with the developer's decision to cancel the event. It isn't very well written as a story and is insensitive to indigenous cultures. This is a rhythm game. Why should a player have to see a story where characters are using the same insults that they have heard used against their own people in real life? They didn't sign up for a poorly written lesson on prejudice that uses their culture as a blueprint when they downloaded this game. There is a thread I found on Twitter underneath the announcement where someone asked, can someone explain what expressions deemed inappropriate means? And someone who, at least online in their bio, claims to be indigenous, said that the cultural appropriation designs towards indigenous people in the gacha and the event story perpetuating racist stereotypes, such as calling indigenous people barbaric and savages, as well as the kind savior colonizer trope. So these are things that I did go over earlier in the video. Now, someone else came in to point out, well, but the people calling them savages are the villains of the story, so, shouldn't it be fine? And also, it's the characters in the story, not the characters of the game itself. And the person replied, yes, but honestly, that word shouldn't even be said at all. Even if the villains are saying it, it's still being said, and it's still hurtful, even if it's meant to be a show. And I can sympathize with this. We don't need our characters that are evil to use such harmful language that has real-world roots in it to show that they are evil. The villain already has a horrible reason for what he's doing, and he is manipulating everyone in the background. That's pretty evil. He didn't have to, the townspeople didn't have to use this terminology in order to express their distaste for the forest dwellers. There are lots of ways to do that, especially if the forest dwellers are not meant to be representative of indigenous cultures. Why would you use the same language that has been used against indigenous cultures in real life in the past if that was not what you were trying to do? So again, this is someone who was concerned about the language usage affecting someone playing this game who honestly, didn't expect to have stereotypes about their culture shown and reinforced, even if the ultimate point of the story was to show that those stereotypes are bad. Here was another thread by someone else in underneath the original statement. I have, of course, censored these people's names because I don't think there should be any hate directed at these people, or at least more than has already been directed at them, just for stating their reasons with why they agree that the event was supposed to be canceled, or should have been canceled. So for anyone unaware of why Revival My Dream is getting removed, the event portrays native cultures as a racist caricature. In the play and the event, the forest dwellers, supposed to be native people, are called barbaric and uncivilized. In addition, the outfits of the cards in the event are a combination of negative stereotypes surrounding native cultures. Racism is weaved into every aspect of this event, which is why the entire event is inappropriate. If you are upset by its removal from EN, please understand that there are things more important than not getting a card in a game. The story/cards are genuinely offensive and a disgusting portrayal of native people. Now, again, like I said, I believe that people on social media probably blew their reactions out of proportion, and people, especially on Twitter, have a tendency to take their comments to the extreme because we have so few characters to try and communicate our thoughts. And so people feel like they kind of have to smack each other across the face, and there's really not a lot of room for nuance or meaningful discussion on that social media platform. But I did feel the need to highlight some of these because these were people who were trying to explain their feelings about this event, and really what I was seeing was just a lot of other people disagreeing with them and declaring that it's not racist, and here's why. And there really was a lot of people saying, oh, are indigenous people complaining about this event? Oh, or even some other people saying like, oh, I'm indigenous and I didn't think this event was harmful. This is so silly. And that's always the wrong approach to take when looking at events like this. People ask, why, if some people were going to be offended by this event, why didn't they just change the cards and the event? I have seen that comment thrown around a lot in discussions about this. And to that, I say we need to look at their statement once again. Let us specifically remember the part that says, we are unable to alter the contents of the story or the gacha to suit the standards that would be acceptable for everyone, even after multiple consultations with the relevant parties. They tried. We don't know how hard they tried, but clearly an analysis was done of how much it would cost to fix the event versus how much money they would make, and they decided ultimately to eat the losses instead of trying to fix an event that has already happened. Now, I want to take a look at Project Sekai as a whole outside of this one particular incident, because this isn't the first time that Project Sekai has made a mistake like this. Earlier this year, the game released a mini-series on their YouTube channel called Fuchiseka, or Petit Sekai, that featured lighthearted vignettes about the various characters and groups. On February 17th of this year, 2022, they aired episode 6, which was called Leo Needs Style, in which Saki gives the group humorous makeovers to help them find their image as a band. This is one of the images/makeovers that the band undergoes during this episode. Well, would you look at that? This episode ended up drawing backlash for this specific moment, where the girls are shown dressed up in a look that is clearly tribal or African in nature, going as far as darkening their skin and using sort of tribal-like face paint and, in the case of some of the other girls, body paint. Now, the company did apologize and removed the video. You can see here that this is the statement they made only a day later, or well, probably not even a full day later, regarding the episode, where they said we would like to issue a sincere apology regarding the use of inappropriate expression in the episode Leo Needs Style. For now, we will be taking down the episode indefinitely. They later uploaded a new version of the episode where the girls get this makeover at that point instead of the image previously seen. Now, you can see that the idea is the same. They're still very lion-inspired, or at least sort of jungle cat-inspired, wearing animal-patterned clothing that is not supposed to look like animal fur, and they still have the ears and tails of lions, hearkening to the part of their name Leo in Leo Need. Now, some claim that the original look was supposed to be ganguro, which is a Japanese fashion style that utilizes heavy tanning, bleached hair, and strong makeup, particularly around the eyes, that is meant to undermine the idea of traditional Japanese beauty, that being pale skin and a more natural look. But if you look at this image, this doesn't feature 2 out of 3 of those prominent aspects of ganguro culture. They don't have bleached hair, their hair colors are exactly the same as normal, and they don't have the heavy eye makeup that is reminiscent of ganguro, which is usually like bright white around the eyes and heavy black eyeliner. The eye makeup around these girls is definitely in the same style as the sort of tribal face paint. So, at best, this was a poor attempt at ganguro inspiration, and at worst, it was an ignorant depiction of a generalized African aesthetic or even blackface. The devs' statement, going back to the devs' statement regarding Revival My Dream, you can see here that further down, it does say that they may make similar decisions in the future and remove in-game contents if they are inappropriate for release, and we are unable to alter it to be suitable for release. The only example I can think of where this might come up is the Heat Up Kamiyama High Cheering Squad event. This event ran earlier this year on the Japanese server in May, and again, it is a Rui-centric event, which is kind of unfortunate. But personally, I think this one is in less danger of being canceled completely. It's based on the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, which is a very popular story in Japan and has been adapted numerous times. It is Chinese originally, of course, and the Romance of Three Kingdoms element of this story is that it's the theme for the cheering competition. So they're not really using it in the same way that we saw things in Revival My Dream. The cheering competition isn't them trying to tell a morality story, and they're not using caricatures or super homogenized or generalized Chinese cultural elements. The only part that might be seen as problematic is the cards. I can't find the card stories, so I don't know if there's anything bad in the stories or problematic. But the costumes in the upgraded cards are Chinese inspired in a way that could be interpreted as stereotyping. So if you look here, the outfits for Mizuki and Luca, it also comes up in Enna's 2-star card. These are clearly Chinese inspired costumes, and it sort of falls under that umbrella of, you shouldn't use somebody's culture as a costume. There was a very popular campaign here in the United States a few years ago about that, around Halloween, about not using other people's cultures as a costume. So that's really the only possible thing I can think of in this event that they might be considering, and maybe they would try to alter it or ultimately remove it. But again, I don't think this one will be canceled entirely. They may decide it's fine to run as is, or maybe they will be allowed to alter the cards, but I don't think the story needs to be changed at all. And I did read the entire event story for this one as well. So either way, this statement really just feels more like the devs were covering their bases in case they felt the need to change or remove any content later down the line, including events that may not have come out yet on the Japanese server. So, at this point, we're sort of at the end of the video, and so I want to sort of give my final thoughts in its own category. A lot of players were very upset to learn that the Revival My Dream event was canceled for the EN server, but I think the devs made the right decision in the end. We all know that Japan is a bit behind the West when it comes to harmful representation and problematic stereotypes and tropes in their media. We can attribute this to their largely homogenized cultural identity as Japanese and their very different history compared to our centuries of immigration and cross-cultural colonization. But that doesn't excuse it, and too often fans are willing to hand-wave these incidents. They say, don't force your liberal Western agenda onto them. But since when was racism part of a Western agenda? Why is it bad to encourage Japanese companies to be more culturally sensitive in an age of global connectivity? If Japan is trying to earn money from a global audience, then shouldn't they know what their audience will want? The Project Sekai devs realized this and looked at the event from the perspective of their Western audience to determine if the content was inappropriate. While I'm sure they never intended to do any harm, the Revival My Dream event story was never going to be a good place to try to tackle such a nuanced theme. The structure of doing bite-sized episodes of character-driven stories was never a good platform for telling this kind of story, especially in a rhythm gacha game. It's just not the place. Some people would argue that you shouldn't tell creators what stories they can and can't write. And I agree with that. But there's the saying that just because you can doesn't mean you should. I think that applies in situations like this. There are times where we must ask ourselves, am I really the right person to tell this story? Am I willing to do the extra work in order to make sure this won't negatively harm or affect anyone? And most importantly, did someone else already tell this story, and should I be directing support to them instead? I don't think Project Sekai needed to tell this story, and clearly neither did they. Do you disagree with me? Did I get something wrong? Let me know in the comments. If you just want to hurl insults at me and call me a snowflake, go ahead, give me the YouTube engagement, but just know that it doesn't really contribute anything meaningful to the conversation. Well, that's all for now, patrons. I hope you read something great, and I'll see you again in the next video.